Thank you. I had to write stuff down because I'm forgetful. So I've been asked today to speak about my role in defeating a proposed frac gas compressor station called Charles Station that Dominion wanted to build on 14 acres of wooded wetlands near my home on the border of Prince George's and Charles counties. Sorry. The group I founded that led this fight was called the Accokeek, Mattawam, and Piscataway Creeks Communities Council, or AMP Creeks, and we've been fighting projects that are harmful to communities and the environment for a long time, primarily in Maryland, but also would have been built on the Cove Point pipeline that terminates at that export terminal. So just so you understand what a compressor station is, as gas travels through pipelines, friction slows it down. So companies like Dominion build compressor stations to speed it back up. Gas flows into such a station, it's compressed at a great pressure, and then shot down the pipeline. Compressor stations leak gas like crazy, and they often catch fire or explode. They're gigantic health and safety hazards, and obviously environmental nightmares. The gas, particularly methane that leaks from them, is not monitored or regulated. And I could probably go on forever about how awful compressor stations are, but since I have limited time, let's jump ahead to the fight. There were many stages in the process, and it lasted for several years, wrapping up only a month or two ago when the last ends were tied up officially. And I want to say at this point that to be effective in this or any fight, we have to recognize that there are many strata that need consideration. So despite the fact that folks working through one means might feel disdain for those using different strategies, we are most successful when we employ diversity of tactics. So everything in our portfolio has a place in securing the wins that we need. We have found that often the ways that that groups like ours are confounded are through lack of funds, lack of knowledge about how to navigate systems that are designed to confound residents and lawmakers and governmental agencies, with a few notable exceptions. Our government's complicity in perpetuating the system is pretty shameful. That said, this wasn't our first rodeo, so we were starting with a leg up. As soon as the Charles Station proposal was announced, we began organizing as many people as possible to attend open houses and meetings to ask questions and voice their opposition. Over the course of the fight, we door-knocked and flyered thousands of homes and at many events. And for the duration of battles, we obviously sent email updates to our growing list and posted information everywhere. Building community is essential. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, was the controlling permitting body for Charles Station. In practice, FERC doesn't actually deny permits for fossil fuel projects, but part of their process is making companies gather up all these other permits from local, state, and federal agencies before they receive their final certificate. So that means you've got to fight FERC and all the other relevant agencies, and they all have different rules and deadlines and processes, but it also gives you an in. That's your way. So when you're dealing with each agency, what you're really preparing to do is go to court. And that means you have to build a record with each one. You must make sure that you have specific information and their actions on file as part of their official record so that you can use them later in a legal setting. The fact is that if you're not doing this, your comments are pretty useless. FERC doesn't care what you think, and most other agencies and politicians don't either. You have to send the comments, but stay focused on building critical mass necessary to force change and not your long game. Let me give you an example of the kind of community building we did. FERC's process is deliberately obtuse, so when they were accepting their first round of public comments, we created and sent out talking points for people who needed them, but also hosted this Get Out of Here dinner to bring community members together to send their comments. We made bags of spaghetti, brought laptops and tablets already set up for people to submit their comments to FERC, and made cheat sheets to help people through the process. My son worked the room helping people sort out technical problems, and we had a jester who donated his time to stroll around providing music and entertainment. So there's a picture of that. I don't know if you can see it. But through our efforts and those of our partners, more than 100 people and organizations sent unique comments, which is important, unique comments, opposing the compressor station during that period, carefully crafted to create our record. Early on, we contacted 3 relevant foundations and tried to convince them to oppose the project, but all 3 erred on the side of Dominion, who donated money to them. That becomes really important later in this fight. While we continued trying to persuade the foundations to come away from the dark side, we entered the most critical part of the fight, a hearing process before the oddly named Charles County Board of Appeals. It is important to note that that board was comprised of volunteers who had been appointed but were not running for election or beholden to donors, and that probably changed the outcome of this fight as opposed to many others. The hearing process was not envisioned to be much of a process at all by the county or Dominion. Normally in such a situation, the applicant, like Dominion, presents their case to the board, and then maybe a few members of the public speak, there's a little discussion, and a decision is made. The Dominion case was already known to be contentious, so they knew there was going to be the possibility of the hearing running late or possibly even going into a second hearing if a lot of people signed up to speak. However, there is the option for an attorney representing opposing parties to cross-examine the applicant's witnesses and present their own, something that a resident with only 3 minutes to speak could not do. So I organized several community members who stood to be most impacted by Charles Station to be expert witnesses during the board hearings, and recruited some technical experts, including, thanks to John Wells, an outstanding activist in this room, a prominent researcher who came down from New York to testify. I worked with these folks and our lawyer to create a compelling case that the compressor station should not be built and to turn out as many people as possible, both to create a strong visual presence and to testify during the public comment section of the process. The prospect of Charles Station was universally hated, and the community packed the room for the entire 12 hearings that ensued. Thanks. Some highlights of that process. Our lawyer consistently making fools of Dominion's witnesses. More than 100 people signing up to speak. The chief and president of a local fire company refusing to show up for questioning even after I served them with 2 subpoenas. I was told because Dominion had gotten to them first. During my own testimony, showing a terrifying video that my son made for me of fires and explosions at other compressor stations. Community members protesting, several for the first time ever, at the Charles Station site, locking down to a tractor parked across the driveway at the Charles Station site and stopping work for half a day, resulting in an appropriate local media buzz, and hearing the members of the board tell Dominion that they were not trustworthy and admonish them for not providing requested information. In the meantime, word got out that the 3 foundations we've been trying to work with were working instead with Dominion and had even accepted money from them. The community was outraged and stopped volunteering for the foundations, made angry phone calls, sent furious emails, and pulled their donations, some in excess of $10,000. One woman rewrote her will to route her assets elsewhere. The foundations began to rethink their position on things. 2 of them also changed leadership during this time, at least one in part due to the way the erupting Dominion situation was being handled. 2 of the leaders finally testified against Charles Station when the Maryland Department of Environment, or MDE, began holding public hearings for the permits that they could issue, and finally even contributed to our legal fund. In the case of the 3rd, a group of community members began focusing their efforts on building a stronger alliance with the new leadership, and that 3rd foundation becomes critical at the end of the fight. We found ourselves in an objectively fascinating but extremely dicey legal situation when it came to MDE. There is a critical clause in a law governing jurisdiction that created a sort of infinity loop. Some people, us, other activists, interpreted it to mean that MDE could not issue a critical permit to Dominion if the Board of Appeals did not grant the zoning that Dominion wanted, which is what we were fighting in the hearing process. Other people, Dominion, disagreed. The law had been tested in an extremely similar case concerning the Myersville compressor station just a few years ago. Learning from that case, we thought we'd figured out a way to prevail, preventing MDE from issuing the permit Dominion needed, and thus the permit they needed from FERC. More organizing, more experts, more legal angling, more meetings, more protests, and fortunately, more help. We found ourselves in the unenviable situation of being in the midst of a hearing process in Charles County, rallying folks also to participate in the MDE process, where we were also working hard to build the groundwork for a courtroom battle, and having to fend off Dominion on a further legal challenge in the Federal District Court of Maryland when Dominion threw a temper tantrum over the way things were going and sued Charles County and the Board of Appeals. At this point, we were paying 3 lawyers and working with another pro bono firm, but I was still doing nothing but organizing and legal work and fundraising for most of those 3 years. Thank goodness so much of that can happen curled up in bed with a laptop. The Board of Appeals ruled in our favor, a gigantic victory that sent Dominion and much of the Charles County government into apoplexy. Dominion appealed, but we prevailed a second time. That said, we still had to win at the Federal District Court and MDE. While we toiled away, that third foundation I mentioned earlier, Mount Vernon, rose out of a slumber to oppose the project because they had suddenly decided it might interfere with their view shed after all. They launched a huge media blitz, piling up a lot of fairly useless online signatures and appallingly fundraising for themselves alone. What happened next is up for interpretation, as are Mount Vernon's actions, their initial decision to side with Dominion, and their decision years later to dip their toes into the water. So much happens behind the scenes. Either way, Mount Vernon announced that they were having closed-door meetings with Dominion to talk about a possible new location for the compressor station that would be out of their line of sight. Just in case there was anything more offensive than waiting in because of their fanatical dedication to the view of a former slave owner as opposed to the safety and welfare of the people living around the compressor station and its siting in an environmentally sensitive location, it is deciding to have publicly announced meetings with Dominion that community members and those of us who had been fighting for years were shut out of. Whether it's because of the substance of those meetings or whether Dominion saw that it was losing a battle that it didn't want to lose and could cover that embarrassment up with the tainted Mount Vernon veil, on October 15th of last year, Dominion announced that they would not be constructing Charles Station at the proposed site, but were still evaluating other locations. So at that point, many people and Mount Vernon backed up. It is shameful to knowingly drop problems of that magnitude in the laps of folks just down the road, so Amp Creek's held our ground. The health of one community is no more important than the health of another. On May 17th of this year, Dominion finally amended their FERC application to say that they now will not build Charles Station. Our community's monumental collective effort had paid off. We won. Thank you. There are obviously some specific circumstances in this case that might not apply to other situations, but there are also some takeaways from the Charles Station fight and many others I've worked on that I want to quickly share. A winning combination requires community building and organizing, judicial intervention, and a long plan, and very often direct action. Less effective are lobbying politicians and trying to work through government agencies. They are often necessary evils, but most people new to activism are genuinely shocked to find out how little their government cares for them. A huge part of activism is drudgery. There's the sexy stuff of photos, but there's also hours of poring over documents and regulations and case law. There is a place for everyone. Nothing works every time, and it is always worth a try. Thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to be here today.
Thank you.